Interest rates continue to go up and so do mortgage costs, but that's not stopping home buyers. In fact, a recent survey shows that 36% of first-time home buyers plan to buy a house within the next 2 years and are optimistic about the state of the housing market. Is that a wise bet, or are they asking for trouble? Joining me now to discuss this and more is Ron Butler, mortgage broker with Butler Mortgage. Ron, great to have you on.
Listen, thanks very much for having me.
Ron, I should also mention that you now host a podcast on YouTube called Angry Mortgage. I watch it. I follow you on LinkedIn. Is it fair to say that you are a little bit angry and a little bit miffed about the crazy house prices and the insane mortgage debt that people are taking on? Do you think that this is a disaster in waiting?
Oh, yeah. I think this is a disaster opening up to average Canadians, particularly young people, people who have the dream of home ownership. As you said, more than 30% of young people who look to be first-time home buyers, they believe they want to do it. They believe they can do it. They're interested. They're motivated. And way too often, they just come up against a brick wall of high prices and unmanageable mortgages. So yeah, it's an issue. I mean, we have essentially every politician in Canada calling it a housing crisis. So it probably is.
Yeah, I guess the will is, do they have the will to fix it? Do you think that, Ron, Canadians are just obsessed with buying homes? Like this is just the narrative? Because if you look at places like Europe, home ownership isn't that big. A lot of people rent. Or is it just that people don't have other options?
Well, it's a great point, but we have to realize that Europe has structurally designed their housing space for rental. Like this is not a recent thing. This is a multi-century approach in cities, particularly in Germany, Switzerland, some parts of France. There is a lot of home ownership in Britain to this day, but it's just a different world. There are a lot of different regulations set up around it that ensure people can stay in the rentals for very long periods of time, probably as long as they want in reality until they choose to leave or they pass away. And there's a lot of rent controls. There's a lot of government supervision and subsidy. So it's really a multi-decade process that they've gone through, and it's something we're just not in a position to replicate here. And throughout North America, the United States is essentially the same as we are, with just much lower prices. And the same thing occurs in Australia, New Zealand. They look the same as we do. So it's a question of a housing culture that's grown up over 150 years, and it's unlikely we're going to be able to change it unless just pure unaffordability gets in the way. But yeah, I think Canadians saw what happened to them in their own childhood, and they saw how their parents were able to buy a house and pay it off. And they feel it's a great thing. They've also seen unparalleled wealth growth in the last 15 years. That's virtually startling. So it makes sense that the narrative is that owning a home is a great idea in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, and United States. And yeah, we're not going to shed that narrative, although we may run into a financial structural problem that in some cases will prevent people from buying.
Ron, we have a minute and a half to the commercial break. Can you just explain how much prices have gone up relative to income? Because, I still hear people saying, oh, well, back in the 80s, people could afford homes. I don't think the situation's the same, though.
There is no relationship to the situation in the late 70s and early to mid 80s. Here's what it was. For so long in Canada, for really a century in Canada, house prices had a direct correlation to average family income. And that number was pretty consistently 2.5 times normal family income was the average price of an average home. Today, if we look at the key areas of Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, Fraser Valley, even interior British Columbia, all of southwestern Ontario. So I'm talking all of it, all the way down to Niagara and all the way up to Barrie and all the way out to Oshawa. That relationship is now 8 to 10 times the price of the home versus average income. You now need the price of the house is 8 to 10 times average family income in those areas. And let's face it, that doesn't make sense versus 2.5 just 25, 30 years ago.